Welcome back to Real Estate Appraisal Principles and Procedures. This is Matt Boxberger, and our lecture for session 14, week 14, will cover chapter 15 in the book, and that will bring us to the conclusion of the material in the book that we'll be covering. So you will have week 15 to finish reading and rereading the material and preparing your final sample report, as well as preparing for the final exam, which will occur in week 16. So let's get started now with chapter 15, which covers the reconciliation process and appraisal reports, the type and content of the appraisal reports. So in the reconciliation process, the appraiser considers a number of things, and as I'll mention again later, reconciliation comes after reviewing, and I'll stress the because as you gather and construct your report, you'll be putting a lot of material together, and you'll need to revisit it, look at it as additional information comes to light, and make sure technically everything is correct. And then when you've got the information from the various approaches or within, for example, the sales comparison approach, you need to reconcile, or correlate is another term they use, that information, use your judgment to arrive at the final value. So let's step through this. In reconciliation, you first look at the definition of value sought by your client. And typically this is going to be the market value of the property at the highest and best use, but not always. There may be some occasions where the client is looking for the value of the property under some set of hypothetical conditions, or as part of a larger business, perhaps not the highest and best use, but at its current use. And so you need to make sure up front that you're clear the type of value being sought, and then refer back to that as you do the reconciliation, as you look at the information you've gathered and are presenting in the report. You also need to consider the amount and reliability of the data collected in each approach and also within the approaches. So, for example, in a single-family residence, you're typically going to rely on the sales comparison approach and will typically have a sufficient number of recent comparable sales to use the sales comparison approach and to give that the most weight in the reconciliation. A church or a special purpose property would be a different situation, where you typically wouldn't find a large number of recent comparable sales, but you could approach it as if the church was being built today, looking at what would be the value of the land in that location, and then what would be the value of the improvements as built and depreciated to their current effective age. So in that kind of report and appraisal, you'd likely give the most weight to the cost approach. You probably wouldn't find an income approach applicable to a church, nor likely sufficient comparable sales to use the sales comparison approach in most markets. You also need to look at what are the inherent, as we discussed earlier, based on the type of property there in point number 2, as well as the assignment specific strengths and weaknesses of each approach. So were you able to gather a large amount of good, reliable data in this particular market for this particular property? And then also, is that type of approach, say the cost approach, typically used by participants, by buyers and sellers in the market? Or if not, then it shouldn't be given much weight. And so using that as well in terms of the overview of what are the strengths of each of the approaches and each of the pieces of data needs to be considered as well. And then the relevance, as I said a bit there in point 2, of the approach to the subject property and the specific market behavior that includes your subject property. Now, at the end, I stress again that reconciliation, although it's presented here primarily as what's done after you've got the 3 approaches or 2 approaches and looking at and weighing those. But also it's very important within an approach, and especially within the sales comparison approach, as you look at the comparable sales you've been able to find and also the adjustments you've had to make. So you need to judge how similar and how reliable are the comparable transactions you found, and also the adjustments you've had to make. So some adjustments are typical and used all the time, like the price per square foot, where you could have a fairly large degree of confidence in them. Others say the value of a tennis court, where you may not have a lot of data, may be a more difficult adjustment to support, and maybe one that you would have less confidence in and choose to give less weight in as you do the reconciliation and decide which comparables to give more weight to and which approach to give more weight to. So they phrase this piece of the presentation as what reconciliation is, but really say a number of points of what it's not, so that you carve out and understand where reconciliation fits within the process. So the first point is that it's not a correction of errors in thinking and technique. In other words, in your reconciliation, you won't be saying, in the sales comparison approach, I use this one, but that really wasn't probably the best comparable to use or the best adjustment. Those kind of things would be corrected or adjusted as you review. And as I said, the re is important, that you're going back and looking again at what you have selected and the verification and the adjustments you've made, and then you do the reconciliation where the data you've got is as strong and as well presented as you believe it can be, and then you make your case for the weight that you're going to give to each of the pieces of data. And so that leads to the second point, that this isn't merely an averaging of values. Now, if for whatever reason you had, say, 3 comparables that really each looked about equally reliable, then the value that you conclude may be the average of the values. Say that it's 3, and you might say that there's some unknown factors that cause one to be higher than the midpoint and one to be lower, but since you're not able to, or there's no market indication of what accounts for those differences, the best judgment you have is that the value of your subject is likely to be right there in the middle, or at the average of those values. And then it stresses also it's not a narrowing of the range of values. The value indications you get either between approaches or within the sales comparison approach need to be accepted as they are what they are. You've done your best to understand and to adjust for the differences, and the values lay where they do, and the reconciliation doesn't narrow those down. It makes a judgment of which to give more weight to, or where in that range is the most probable value of the subject. But it's not a narrowing down of the ranges. It's an analysis of the range of the values. And then in conclusion here, it says it is the analysis and the judgment, and I'll stress especially the weighing or weighting of the data in terms of which is most reliable and which do you give the most weight to in coming to your final conclusion of your expert opinion of value, which is what the appraisal is. So then they move in the chapter on to discuss the types of appraisal reports. And within USPAP, the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, there are 3 types of appraisal reports defined, and those are listed and described briefly here. The self-contained report is the most detailed. Think of it as presenting or containing all of the research you've done, all of the data you've got, perhaps condensed down. There may be additional information in your file that you looked at but decided wasn't particularly helpful, but everything that you did rely on, you describe in detail in this report and lead the reader then to the final conclusion of value. Typically, self-contained reports are requested for very large, high value, or specialized kinds of properties where the reader may not be particularly familiar with the market and needs to understand the depth and the strength of the appraiser's analysis. The summary report is the most common kind. In this case, sufficient information is presented, but it will be a summary, not complete information that you would see in a self-contained report. And the summary report is typically a form report like the URAR or 10004 report that we're using for the sample report you're doing here for the course. Now, restricted use report is shorter and it is limited to the value and the other required information. It's made for a specific client and a very limited purpose. So it might be an update of a report previously done, and the client understands the property, the market. The client's not passing it on to their lender or to someone else that may not have as much in-depth knowledge. And so for that type of report or that type of assignment, a restricted use report can be the most appropriate report. The amount of research you do may be the same or more than you would for a summary report, and you'd have this information in your files, but the reporting piece of it would be more condensed and restricted in its use to the client for the appraisal you're doing. So then there are styles of reports, and for the written reports, there's a form and narrative. There's also a verbal report that's specified in USPAP. Again, with a verbal report, you would still have a file of written information and your summary and analysis, but for the client, it may be appropriate to simply give them the information verbally and document that you had done that and what you had told the client in the report. And if you have some experience with USPAP, you'll know that there's requirements for how long you retain the file. So it's still a formal report, even if it's verbal, and the information needs to be retained, and you need to be able to produce it and to discuss or defend it at some point in the future. So within the written reports, though, they talk about a couple of form reports, and for whatever reason they zero in on a couple of shorter ones, the 2055 and 2075, which are used occasionally, but I'm not quite sure why in the book they give that so much space on the page. But those are types of form reports. The one that you're using and that you'll typically use in residential appraising is the 10004, the URAR form. That's the very common type of form. The narrative report, although it's typically self-contained, it can be a summary report or even a restricted use report. The difference is that with the narrative, there's not a set of checkboxes or fields to fill in, that the appraiser presents the information in the form that the client wants or that the appraiser typically uses. And you'll see in the book there's a fairly detailed list of the content, some of which is required by USPAP, and not necessarily in the exact order, but in terms of the content that's required or typical. That's shown on page 409 to 415 of your book, and that can be helpful for you as you're preparing your report as well, in terms of seeing the type of information that would be gathered and then how it would be mapped into, in our case, the form 10004. So in conclusion, this is the last lecture that we'll do for the course, and the quiz you'll do this week is the last quiz for the course as well. I won't have any additional discussion forum topics. There won't be one this week. So in the coming weeks then, in week 15, you'll need to finish all the reading or rereading through chapter 15, and this lecture covers the content of chapter 15. The balance that I've got assigned on the syllabus for next week is really the example report and the example content that can help you prepare your example report. So the data is shown on page 419 to 423, and a typical URAR report filled out is on page 416 to 417, which again you can use to understand the type and the amount of detail to put in your report. And then week 16 will be our final, so the work that week will be to study for and then prepare to take the final exam. So that'll wrap up the lectures, and then we'll talk to you again online as you complete the report and submit it and prepare for our final.